perfect.
If it's perfect, well, this is the only AI thing in the message. Let's just say that. So if I'm not perfect, you'll understand why. I've got to actually stand up here and talk. But anyway, this is going to be 3 weeks longer. This is kind of a setup week, so it's not going to be super exciting with like a ton of great action or anything. But it's important to lay the groundwork for what we're going to talk about the next 2 weeks after this. But I guess I have a question to start out with. And you kind of stole my thunder already when you guys gave some testimonies and stuff about what God's doing in your life, because it really fits in with what we're going to talk about today. And it kind of edits a lot of stuff I was going to say, so it is what it is. Anyway, this thing just goes that way and then that way. Go back. It's supposed to go that way and that way. All right.
There's more people that haven't shared yet if you were going to do that.
Well, if I do that, we'll be here all afternoon, and we don't want to do that. I think and I'm still going to try to edit some things, but nonetheless. Have you all ever gone through a season where God seemed silent? Where you didn't see him working? Where you didn't feel it? You just weren't feeling it, Your prayers weren't being answered. At least you weren't seeing them. There was uncertainty in your life. You didn't know how you were going to move through the situation that you were in. You were praying, but you didn't really see the next step. Maybe you were just waiting on something, or you were even just a little. You have those periods, at least I do, where you kind of feel distant. You feel a little bit spiritually unsettled. You don't feel quite in the groove. I think that's a very common thing. And when we do these stories, especially when we go into the Old Testament, what's the stuff that we normally see? We normally see big miracles, right? And God delivering, and God speaking through a prophet, or God talking some kind of great pronouncement, And the thing about Esther is, it's not like that. The first point that I wanted to make, I kind of previewed. A remarkable feature about Esther. God's name is never mentioned in this book. It's the only book out of the 66 in the Bible where there's no reference to God by name or by any reference at all from any of the people in the story. And I didn't know that when I first started looking into this. But, like I said before, there's no prophets in this book. There's no miracles in this book. At least ones that, people look and they say, well, ooh, God did this. There's no audible voice from heaven to any of the characters. It doesn't talk about how somebody prayed and God answered their prayer. It doesn't talk about any of that. So the reason that I kind of titled the whole thing Hidden Hand is because I think what we'll see as we move through is God is working. We just don't see it. So what I want to do, as we often do, is kind of set the stage. Historical perspective is important. We talk about that all the time. What's the setting? What are the people? What's the history? Where are they at? All of that stuff. So let's take a few minutes at the beginning and just kind of go back a little bit. Israel was once a powerful, powerful nation. It wasn't huge, but they were unique and they were powerful. There were glory days under King David, under Solomon, right? King David went and conquered all of the area that God gave him for the people of Israel. And then Solomon, reigned over a peaceful, many, many years. But then after that, what happened? The kingdom split, right? The northern and southern kingdom. Bad kings, one bad queen, mostly bad kings. Throughout the whole history of both nations, the northern and the southern kingdom was Judah. And by the time of Esther, Israel had been conquered and scattered. The first one on the northern kingdom was in the 700s BC, and it was the Assyrians that came in and took the northern kingdom captive. The southern kingdom hung on for a while, but it's declining in the mid-500s. It was conquered too by the Babylonians. Remember Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are taken with the other young men of Israel to Babylon under Nebuchadnezzar, and then the whole story about Daniel through that period of the Babylonian captivity. Well, what happened subsequent to that is that Babylon was conquered by Persia. So by the time of Esther, they're all still in exile. They're all still scattered, but they're under Persia now, not under Assyria or Babylon. It's just moved on. So there's about 3 generations, we'll see in a second, between what happened in Babylon with Daniel and Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego and what happens here in Persia with Esther. Any other things from that page? Nope, we'll move on from that. So continuing the setting a little bit, think about this and let's try to make some application here.
One other context is the years, this is during the 500s before
Yes.
Jesus.
Yes,
And then I think Esther's story occurs in the 400s.
that's right. 486 to 476, something like that. And I'm sure all of us have all these references in history for what's going on then in our world, which, by the way, nobody does. But in this particular case, that's where it happened. So the captivity from Jerusalem, when it was torn down, right, by the Babylonians and the Daniel and them left, was 586-ish. This is a good 100 years or more, right? It's a little bit more after that. And Babylon is no more, and they're kind of assimilated into Persia. And Persia's a lot bigger than Babylon. We'll look at a map here in a minute. So God's people are not at home. Some Jews by this time had returned to Jerusalem. If you remember, at the beginning of the Persian reign, Nehemiah goes to the king at the time and says, our way of living, we're a, monotheistic, we have one God, and the temple was torn down by those Babylonians. Remember, Persia just took over from Babylon, so they don't like them very much. And the king says, okay, go back and rebuild. Now, that doesn't mean that they were free. They were still under Persian rule, but they were allowed to go back and rebuild. And so some of the scattered people had come back to Jerusalem, but the majority had not. And I'll show you a map in a second. You'll see just how vast it is. But most of them had remained dispersed all throughout there. So Esther takes place in the midst of all this, with them still being in exile. What I want us to do as we kind of think through this is think about, put yourself in their place. And really we can do that more than you think, but we don't really think about, what were they going through. But they're a very small piece of a very big empire. And they believe totally different than all of these people that are in the empire believe. It's a totally pagan place. And they're just a small, vulnerable remnant that they have of what's in that kingdom. God's people are not at home. I thought about this what I was trying to do, even in the first session, is I wanted to kind of draw some parallels to us. And there's a parallel here for us. America's a great country, But as we've learned from all of Kevin's teaching and all of the things that we went through Romans and talked about Paul, we're not home either. This is not our home. And it's a good place to live. We don't live under oppression. Many Christians across the world do. We're not oppressed. But we hardly live in a Christian nation anymore. We hardly live in a nation where people share our values and worship our God or even think about our God. I mean, if you went to 100 people in Walmart this afternoon, how many of them really have spent their Sunday morning worshiping God and thinking about God? And how many people on a typical Wednesday in there are going to be able to converse with you about our God? It's not impossible. There's a lot of us, but there's a lot who aren't. Our nation is certainly not run as a Christian nation completely, for sure. So just like the Jews that are in Persia are, vulnerable and they're kind of displaced. They don't feel at home. They're tempted with compromise to fit in. They stand out with their practices. They stand out with how they worship. They stand out with the things that they eat and don't eat. They stand out with all of their customs, right? Among everybody else that's there. And it's a vulnerability. There's a lot of underlying, every society has this racist kind of, they're not like us thing. In our case, a lot of it is black, white, or rich, poor, or whatever. But in a lot of places, it's really, you're not of my kind. You're a different kind. And that's what was going on here. And we'll talk about that a little bit more as we go forward. But we should be able to identify this from the point of view of, we're not home either. So try to put that in your mindset. A little bit more about Persia, and then we'll move on from historical. There's 127 provinces from India to Ethiopia. It's gigantic. I'm going to throw up a picture here that you're not going to be able to see very closely, probably. I'll come back here in a second. That, I don't know how much of that you can see, but that's the kingdom that they're a part of. So on the far left goes all the way to Greece. On the far right, it goes all the way to India. It goes to the Indus River, the border to India. To the south, the Persians control Egypt now. The Egyptian, greatness of the pharaohs and all is long gone. The little bitty piece in the eastern part of the Mediterranean, obviously, is Jerusalem and Israel. That's part of it too. But look how small it is compared to the overall kingdom. So, it goes from Greece to India to Egypt and everywhere in between. A huge, huge kingdom. Huge, huge empire. Just wanted to give you a picture of that. 127 provinces all over the place in their kingdom. They have massive wealth and military power. More than anybody ever had in the history of the world to that time. Now, it gets surpassed over time. Every kingdom rises and falls, right? By the way, so does America at some point. We hope we're not around for that. America's 250 years old. We're celebrating our 250th this year. Very proud of it. It's awesome. In the scope of human history, though, 250 years is like that. So, we think we're great, and we are great, but how long? Nobody is at the top forever. I already talked about a few of them. You've got the Persians right now, then you have the Greece, and then you have Rome, and then you eventually get into, France and England and all of their colonialism, right? And then you get into America and all this. So, are we getting happy? Are you happy, Donna Marie?
It's a new phone and I don't know how to silence it.
It's great timing, though.
I'm happy. I don't think you're very happy about us calling you out on that, but I'm happy. All right. Where was I? I don't know. I was getting happy. Massive wealth. They have a culture. It's not really unlike ours or any other culture that's like the top of the totem pole at the time. But they have a real culture of status and image and excess. And we'll get into that in chapter 1 here in a minute. The party that they talk about at the very beginning here is just about as excess as you can possibly imagine. And that's the kind of power and status and image that this king had projected. Speaking of the king, in most of your translations, maybe not all, the king's name is Ahasuerus. Now, there's a couple of reasons that I'm not going to use that name. Number one is I think his name is really Xerxes. He was the main king at the height of the Persian kingdom, and that's who I believe is the king during this period. Some people think it's his son or his grandson, and they have names that are equally difficult to pronounce, so I didn't put them up here. The other reason I'm not going to use Ahasuerus anymore is because that's really hard to say. So we're either going to refer to him as the king, who's in charge at the time, or we'll maybe use the word Xerxes from time to time. But if you see it in your Bible as Ahasuerus, that's the way it's written. That's the Hebrew version of the Persian name, which maybe the Hebrews could pronounce it, but in English it ain't easy. I can do things like Mephibosheth. That's not that hard for me. But Ahasuerus just doesn't roll off the tongue. So anyway, I already talked about the kind of historical setting. Let's move on to chapter 1. So I titled chapter 1 kind of Power and Instability. Again, remember as we're talking about everything that goes forward, because I kind of sometimes get a little out of whack, but what we're really talking about here is this book is going to teach us that God often works when we don't see it. He's working behind the scenes, even when he's not named in the book, even when they're not mentioning him in their prayer time. He's working for his people in the background. He knows what's coming, and we'll get to that in weeks 2 and 3, what's coming and how it's resolved. But even now in the setup here, he's already working in things that we talk about today to prepare for the time when his people need deliverance. And he's doing that in our lives too all the time, and we don't see it either a lot. So, the first part of week 1, let's just open by reading the first 4 verses, just to give us an idea. And like I said, I'm going to bounce around, and I'm not going to read all of this by any stretch. But verses 1 through, I'll go into verse 5. It took place in the days of the king who reigned in India, from India to Ethiopia, over 127 provinces. In those days, as the king sat on his throne, which was in the citadel in Susa. In the 3rd year of his reign, listen to this, he gave a banquet for all his princes and attendants, the army officers, the nobles, and the princes of his provinces, being in his presence. And he displayed the riches of his royal glory and the splendor of his great majesty for many days, 180 days. Now that's a party. I'm sure people were coming and going. It doesn't really give a lot of details. But given a 180-day party is kind of a thing. First of all, it means that their kingdom is pretty stable because he has time to bring in all of these people and all for a year and a half, or for half a year, I mean. And then in verse 5, and this is kind of important too, when these days were done, completed, the king gave a banquet lasting 7 days for all the people who were present at Susa, from the greatest to the least, in the court of the garden of the king's palace. So a couple things about that. Number 1, he has a palace. He has a garden. He's got a court inside the garden. And the court inside the garden is big enough for all the people of the whole city to come in and be a part of it. So this is a big place. It's a big splendor kind of thing. And so that's what I wanted to do, just kind of set the stage. But let's move on to this slide. So what he does is he displays his wealth and his power. Now, I put on the last bullet, there's power and authority, and then there's pride and vanity. And they are all mixed in here. But in the first 6 months, when he's bringing in the bigwigs, right? He brings in his army, he brings in his princes, he brings in all the people from all the provinces that run those provinces. I believe that's a power and authority statement. It's like, listen, I got this huge kingdom, and there's going to be challenges. There always is when you're the king, right? But look at what I've got. Look at all my power. Look at my authority. I can, come and go, all these people. I can wine and dine, and we use gold cups, and we use gold, plates. Here's all, look at all the fancy stuff in my palace. If you want to stay in power, you better align yourself with me. There's a power statement here, I think, in the big first 180 days. And then he brings in all the people that live there, from the greatest to the least. And I think that's a pride and a vanity thing. And he says, look at all I have. You're lucky to live in this place where you get to bask in the glory of the remnant of all that shines in my kingdom. Kevin, yours didn't do that.
Holy Spirit.
It's saying, move on, I guess. I need this. What happened? I do not know. All right. So all of that's happening. Basically, he's saying to in the 6-month period, I think he's saying to all of them, listen, I'm the man. Follow me, do what I say. It'll go great with you. I can bring you in. Look at all this great, party you're having. And for the others, he's displaying the pride and the vanity. The queen also, Queen Vashti at the time, also gives a banquet during that time for the women in Susa at the end of the 187 days. So anyway, let's look at verses 10 through 12 here real quick. This is the next movement in the story. This is kind of the first step in God's plan that's going to continue through the whole book. In verse 10 of chapter 1. On the 7th day, this is 187 of the whole thing. It's the last day of the last feast that he's doing. When the heart of the king was merry with wine, translation, he was probably a little tipsy, if not a lot, by 187th day. He commanded his eunuchs, the 7 that were in the presence of the king, verse 11, to bring Queen Vashti before the king with her royal crown in order to display her beauty to the people and the princes, for she was beautiful. But Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command delivered by the eunuchs, and the king became very angry, and his wrath burned within him. I think there's a lot there. I'm going to try to skim the surface a little bit and give us a picture. But first of all, he's drunk. Do you ever really make a decision when you're drunk? No, probably not a good idea. Bobby, it's not a good idea, is it?
No, it's not.
Yeah, I've been there, done that a few times. It never works out. So anyway, he calls the queen. Again, I think this last feast for the whole people, so all the people are there, right? From the greatest to the smallest. And he wants to say, hey, look at me, look at this queen. She's something. Look how she's dressed. Look at the crown. Look at all of this, right? I don't know why Vashti decided I'm not going to go. I think there's two possible reasons. One is she felt, I think, pretty secure as the queen. And I think she was just trying to push back a little and say, listen, king, you can't just call me whenever you want. I'm not like one of your maids. I think there was a little bit of maybe pride in her too, because pride kind of runs through this whole group. But I think it also might just be, and it doesn't say it here, how many times in that 187 days you think he called her to get all dressed up and parade him in front of these people as they're coming and going? I don't think this was the first time. I think he had done it for 6 months. And I think she's like, all right, buddy. These people aren't even that important. They're just the peasants. I ain't doing it. I don't know why. I can't, it's a speculation on my part, I'll be honest with you. But for whatever reason, she pushes back, which doesn't end well for her. And I don't know why she didn't know that. You would think she would know. But she pushed back. She must have thought she was secure enough that it wasn't going to cost her everything, or she would have done it.
Well,
She wouldn't have done it.
I was with you, like,
Yeah,
when I even asked Tim last night, I said, why would Vashti do that?
that's
You know,
right.
why?
Yes.
It doesn't tell us why.
No.
But then later, when I was trying to fall asleep, it was like, God was saying, because I had her do that.
Yes,
It was important,
that's right.
you know, that was the only way to get Esther
Right.
in there to
Right.
complete the rest of the plan.
And that's really where we're going.
Yeah.
And the point is, there's nothing in here that says God influenced any of this.
Yeah.
But one way or another, either her own pride and vanity, her own stubbornness, her own whatever, or just because she just flat out got tired of being paraded around. I don't know what it was. But whatever it was, God uses it, right? It becomes step one of this process of Esther getting to be where he needs Esther to be for what's coming next. And that's really the point. So the king asks for advice.
You know, one other thing I'd like to say,
Yep.
I was reading about the history of the Persian Empire, and there had been two big battles with the Greeks. Darius did the first one, and 10 years before, the Greeks beat them badly, but there was still up the Constantinople, where it became later on, there was a place in the sea where they had a big battle that Xerxes did, and he got beat there too.
Mhm.
Just 300 guys from Sparta beat these thousands of Persians. So he was really had been humiliated. And so when he came back, he decided to throw a big party to show that he really was a big deal.
Okay, so part of it was, I suffered a defeat and I didn't know that, I didn't look at that, but that makes sense, because they never got to Greece. They stopped at the edge of like Turkey and Greece. So the next thing that I want to point out, we talked about this big, huge kingdom and how massive and in control he was and all of that. But think about this for a minute. He has a situation where his wife doesn't do what he asked her to do. None of us in this room have ever been there, but if we were to be there, the one thing that I'm not going to do, I'm not going to call a council of people together and ask them what to do about it. I think he was publicly very projecting power, but I think inside he was pretty insecure. He didn't know what to do. He could run a kingdom, but he couldn't run his own household. There's a level of, I tried to think of the right word, I can't really think of it. There's a level of uncertainty in him that he has to call his counselors together to make any decisions about anything. You rarely see very much in the whole book as we move forward where he makes a decision on his own just without calling in a bunch of people and talking about things. So I don't think he's a very decisive guy. But I want to say this, because there's a proverb, Proverbs 15:22, and it says, without consultation, plans are frustrated, but with many counselors, they succeed. So it seems to me, in one level, like what Xerxes is doing here by calling in his counselors is a wise thing. In other words, don't fly off the handle, bring in your advisors and talk this out. But that's not really what he's doing. And that's not really what this verse is saying either. So for our perspective, for our kind of our application here is, obviously this advice about seeking counsel for your plans is wise. Solomon said it. He's the wisest man ever because he asked God for that power to be a wise man and make wise decisions. So if the plan is good and the advice is good, it's good to give advice. But if it's a bad plan and you're asking the wrong people for advice, that's not the way to go. So I guess all I would say is, in our lives as we move forward with decisions that we have to make, either if I have a rift with my wife about something, or if it's some bigger matter for the church or some bigger matter at my work or your work or whatever, it is good to get counsel. What he did was not necessarily bad, he just had bad people around him. So be careful who you ask, and be careful what the advice is, if it's good advice or not. You have to weigh that in your life, and we have to weigh that in our body. So it's not the fact that he went for advice that's bad. I'm not condemning that. I just think he was surrounded by people that didn't have his best interest at heart. If you really look at it, what did they say? And I'm not going to read the rest of the verses in chapter 1, but I do want to kind of point out that he went to his counselors and they said basically, look, you got to do something about this queen, because she just didn't do what you said and everybody saw it. And if the queen can do that to the king, all our wives are going to rebel against us, and all the women in the kingdom are going to rebel against their husbands, and we're going to have just a free-for-all. So Vashti in some ways is kind of the first women's lib that there is. But the point is, he was given advice not based on what was best for him and his family and his wife and his relationship and his queen. He was given advice because they were all scared of what it would mean for them. So a lot of people give you advice, but it's really self-serving. You don't want people giving you advice in your life that are the self-serving type. You want people that will, A, not just pat you on the head and say everything's okay, or B, manipulate the situation to give you advice that's best for them. You want somebody who can speak into your life the truth, even if it's hard, and then you can weigh that and make a better decision. So the kind of counsel that we get is important, and the kind of counsel that the king gets, not just now, but when we get into the next section in next week, he gets really, really bad counsel. And he's not wise enough on his own to be able to weigh that and say that was a bad idea. And it's going to cost him, and it's going to cost the advisors too, for that matter. So the last thing I'll say on chapter 1, this isn't really the place for us to do the whole judgment of Vashti thing, but I think what you said, Linda, is the key, which is God used it for his purpose. It was part of his plan. So Queen Vashti refused the command. Why did I do the flapping thing? Okay. There's 3 real takeaways from chapter 1. Number 1, human power can look impressive, but underneath it can be fragile at the same time. And I think if you look back at history, at leaders in various kingdoms at the end of their reigns when things kind of go south, what you'll see is there was a lot of fragility underneath the big macho show of force. And I think that's the case here. I don't think the king was a very good decision maker. He relied on these advisors, and his advisors were not very good. He didn't have a really good framework in which to make good decisions, and so you'll see what happens later. The second thing, and I mentioned it a lot already, but the empire is built on pride and appearance. It's really important to the king to look good. It's really important for those leaders to look good. And then, I mentioned it already, but I want to just kind of say, there's a song that we sing all the time. It's called Waymaker. And we sing, even when we don't see it, he's working. Even when we don't feel it, he's working. He's always working. I think this story, certainly at this point, is a case study in that. In verse 19, this is when Vashti gets the ouster from, this is again advice from the advisors. If it pleases the king, let a royal edict be issued. Let it be written in the laws of Persia and Media, so that it cannot be repealed, that Vashti may no longer come into the presence of the king. And let the king give her royal position to another who is more worthy than she. So God's working in this, even in ways that nobody sees. And at the end of chapter 1, basically, we have the current queen gone, and we've set the stage for what's coming next. So, Vashti's removal opens the path for Esther. Linda, you nailed it. You want to come up here and do the rest? You've already got it here. Okay. But nothing is like super spiritual here. There's no miracle. God's work is unfolding quietly and nobody sees it. At the end of verse 1, it's all unseen. They seem like random or ordinary or political kind of events, but God's orchestrating that for the purpose that comes later. So God's work doesn't require dramatic. Humans tend to want dramatic. We want to see the big thing. We want to see the miracle. We want to see that. But that's not how God works most of the time. And everything that we testified about earlier that you all said, there was no big pronouncement from God in the whole thing. It's just he works in our lives. And he's working in this too. So at the end of chapter 1, nobody realizes that the future deliverance of God's people, which is coming, is already moving into place through this. So let's move to chapter 2. So Vashti's exit leaves an opening, right? The king needs a queen and the queen is out. Now we don't know what happened to her, but we know she ain't here anymore because we never hear from her again. He may have strung her up. He may have just sent her home. We don't really know. But at any rate, he needs a king. The advisors who are so smart and so looking out for him are like, look, you can't be a king without a queen. This doesn't look good for you. It doesn't look good for the kingdom. We need to get you one. And that's a very big paraphrase of the first part of chapter 2. But seriously, the first few verses, that's what's going on. And then a couple of main characters that we're going to talk about for the rest of the time come into place. We're going to look at chapter 2, starting in verse 5. Hang on. I got to get my slides in line with what I'm doing. So Esther and her cousin Mordecai are introduced here. In verse 5, it talks about who Mordecai is. He's the son of 3 other Jewish men who had been taken into exile from Jerusalem with the captives, who were exiled when Nebuchadnezzar took over for Babylon. So Daniel, Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego go to Babylon. A contemporary of theirs was Kish. And Mordecai is the great-grandson of that. So this is the 4th generation after they had left the southern kingdom, left Jerusalem. Mordecai is the son of Jair, who's the son of Shimei, who's the son of Kish, who had been taken captive then. So this is the 4th generation that's now in Persian rule. The first were under Babylon. Verse 7, he was bringing up Hadassah, whose name was Esther. So Esther's other name, I guess, is Hadassah. I guess that's maybe the Hebrew name, and Esther is a name that she got, being under the Persians. Esther is Mordecai's uncle's daughter, for she had no father or mother. So Mordecai is Esther's cousin. Now Mordecai's probably older than Esther, but probably quite a bit probably older than Esther, but nonetheless, they're cousins. Now the young lady, Esther, was beautiful of form and face, and when her father and mother died, Mordecai took her as his own daughter. So something happened to Esther's mom and dad, we don't know what, but they passed away, and she comes under the leadership, under the family of Mordecai, and he raises her. Now we don't know anything about them prior to this. But what we do know, just at a high level about Mordecai, is he's a wise man. I don't think that God put Esther under him accidentally. And later on in the story, you're going to see some places where Mordecai has a really big impact on the story. We'll see one at the end of this chapter that seems insignificant, and then later we'll find out it wasn't. But he's wise and he's being used by God, but we don't know anything else about him. He gives great advice to Esther throughout the story. The only thing we know about Esther at this point is she's an exile, so she's living in a strange land with some of her people, out of this huge empire. We know that she's an orphan and was taken in by her cousin. We know that she was very likely hidden and powerless and wasn't really known by anybody. She was kind of a normal, young, Jewish person in a strange land. That's all she was. But in spite of all that, the lack of status, position, or anything else, God positions her for being used mightily later on to save all of his people. And what I want to say about that is a good lesson for us, because we often expect God to work through things we can see. Like if we don't see it, we lose faith, we lose heart. We feel like, well, God, you're not moving. But he's moving in all of this, and we don't even see it yet. He doesn't often work through, kings and generals and wealthy people. He often works through people like exiles and orphans and fishermen and shepherds and carpenters, whales and donkeys. And he works in ways that we can't quite understand. But he is working. That's the whole point. So God has already raised up Mordecai and Esther, even though nobody knows it yet, to play a part in our story as we move forward. And my whole point with this part is just to say, what Esther's story is showing us, and will continue to, is that he's working in unseen and hidden ways. I said, we always look for miracles and dramatic answers to things, and being able to see extraordinary events and all that. And in the Old Testament, there's a lot of that. Like I said, all the other books have prophets, and all the other books have miracles and all this other stuff. And in Esther, we don't see any of that, but we can see the thread. And we'll pull on these threads later, and they're going to show us even more. So I'm going to take a detour at this point. Am I supposed to click yet or not? I do not think so. I'm going to tell a little testimony about an unseen thing that happened in my life. I don't think most of y'all know this story. This goes back to 1984. I'm that old. I was born in 1963, so by 84, I'm already grown. But I didn't know what was going on in my life. This is going to show it. So in 1984, I'm going to graduate early from the University of Florida in 3.5 years. I took some AP classes and I was ahead, so I was going to get out in December and I was going to start working. So in September, I got an interview with a company in Huntsville, Alabama named Intergraph. I don't know if they're around anymore. I think they got bought by somebody else, so it's like one of those deals. But they were a very prominent company in IT at the time. So I flew to there. We had a whole day worth of interviews and stuff. It went really well, and they extended me an offer, and they said, when you're done in December, you can start here in January. So my whole plan was, I'm going to be in Huntsville, Alabama. I'm going to start my career there, and I don't know what's going to happen after that, but that's where I'm going. And the offer was a good offer, and it was a really nice fit for me and all of that. And, I didn't really think about this for a long, long time. It's because I'm an idiot. It's because in our lives, things just happen, and we don't really look back at the significance of them. But, I thought back through it. In the fall of '84, I had known Joji, but I'd only known her I had met her the New Year's Eve before, so we're talking 8 months, but I hadn't spent any time with her for that whole spring semester because I was in school and she was in Cocoa Beach. She ends up in Jacksonville over that summer. We spent a little time together, but in September, we had only dated, a few times or whatever. We weren't really all that close. And so had I moved to Huntsville, I probably don't marry her and move with her, which means my kids aren't here, which means I may never have ever even landed in Lexington, Kentucky, or ever known anything about horses. I would have probably, secondarily to a Gator fan, been an Alabama fan. Isn't that terrible? I wore this red shirt as a reminder to never do that. That would have been horrible. It's much better to be a Kentucky fan second than an Alabama fan. So I would have never been at this church. I'd have never known any of you all had this occurred the way I had it planned. So in God's wisdom, which I did not see at the time, He has me contract mono and strep in September of '84. And I mean, when I say contracted it, I mean I had it bad. I would try to go to school, go to class for a few days. I'd do okay. I'd come home and I'd just be flat for 3 days or something. For September, go to school some days, just not be able to move other days. At the end of September, I call my folks. They drive down from Jacksonville and take me home. And found out I had, strep and mono, and they gave me shots for the strep. They said it was one of the worst cases they'd seen, which I don't know what that means, but I do know I couldn't swallow anything. Dr. Scott could explain the physiological, but it was pretty bad. I went from like 210-pound football player to 170-pound, emaciated, pants not being able to stay up kind of person. So obviously I had to drop out. For the whole month of October, I will say that I don't remember it. I don't remember anything. I was in bed most all the time. I ate a little, I guess. And finally by November, I was feeling better. But the point being, I got mono, I had to drop out, I had to go back for the spring semester, and I didn't see God's hand in that at all. I saw the exact opposite. It's like, what is wrong here? I had everything lined up. But look at how it's changed everything in my life. Everything in my life was pivotal upon that moment, and I didn't even know it. And that was God saying, you don't belong in Huntsville, you belong in Lexington. I didn't know anything about Lexington. You belong with this woman that you're fixing to leave, and you don't want to go to Huntsville without her because you're an idiot. You don't know what you're doing. Who knows who you'll end up with?
Well, you're not an idiot.
You're not an idiot.
Well, you should have seen me when I was, that would have been, I was 19. I was. Maybe I'm still a little bit less of one, but boy, who knows what would have happened to me. I wasn't making great choices, and I didn't make the choice of Joji either. God did it. And I did, all of this was beyond my knowledge. So to say all that, the reason I say all that is, let me see if I'm supposed to move on here. I've lost track of my charts. No, I'm not. So God didn't work audibly in my life. He didn't tell me, don't go to Huntsville. He didn't say, I'm giving you mono and this is good for you. He didn't say anything, but the circumstances worked out to where when I can look back 40 years past, I see how he weaved it all. And I was just part of it. And that's a really good thing, that we don't have to make all of our own decisions, that he directs our paths, right? Tim?
There's a famous poem by Corrie ten Boom
Okay.
called "A Life is a Weaving."
Yeah.
It says, "My life is but a weaving between my God and me. I cannot choose the colors. He weaveth steadily. Oft times the weaver weaveth sorrow, and I in foolish pride forget he sees the upper and I the underside. Not till the loom is silent and the shuttles cease to fly will God unroll the canvas and reveal the reason why. The dark threads are as needful in the weaver's skillful hand as the threads of gold and silver in the pattern he has drawn. He knows, he loves, he cares. Nothing his truth can dim. He gives the very best of those who leave the choice of him."
Very good. Right. And that's what he's starting to do here. He's starting to weave this story together, and the threads are like, where are these going? We'll see it at the end, right? So back to the story. I guess my point with all that was just to say, a lot of events in our lives that seem random or even difficult things that we don't understand what's going on. It's all in his plan, and he already sees it, and he's weaving it together for our good. And the best thing that ever happened to me probably was that. But I tell you what, you're laying in the bed for a month and you can't even get out of bed, and you don't even remember. You're not really thinking, well, thanks, God. But now I'll definitely say thanks, God. That was great. I wouldn't want to do it again, so no more mono, please, but it was very helpful. Okay, back to the story. So, we talked about the first shoe to drop, which was Vashti being removed. That gave an opportunity for Esther, but still, how does she, out of all of the women that were brought in, all of the ones that were suitors for being queen that the king might select, how would she get picked? I mean, at a minimum, she's one of 127, because every province sent somebody. It was probably more than that. So what happens for that to occur? She's taken into the royal system. She's brought in. There's already kind of a harem, but now they've brought in all of these women, and they're going to spend time with the king. They're going to, be interviewed, probably poked and prodded and everything else to try to figure out if they're material for it. How can somebody like Esther?
It's the Bachelor 1.0.
It's the Bachelor before the Bachelor. That's right. It's the precursor to the Bachelor. We don't have any of those episodes, or it'd be nice to see what kind of was going on. But definitely, that was what was going on. But it says in Esther 2, verses 8 and 9, especially verse 9, she's taken into the royal system and she finds favor with one of the eunuchs that's over the harem that has all of these women in it. So she finds favor with this his name I think was, I forgot. Haggai, I think? Haggai. It doesn't say how. Haggai, yeah. Haggai was the guy for the harem. How did he find favor with the eunuch? And having favor with the eunuch, how does that help her? Well, first of all, he was in charge of where everybody stayed and all that. So he gave her food, he gave her cosmetics, so she would be able to look nice. He gave her some attendance. He put her in like the best position in the harem or whatever their places were where they stayed. He gave her the best one. There's 3 places actually in chapter 2 that it says Esther finds favor. The first one's verse 9. She finds favor with that eunuch. And I think that's important because he kind of was able to make sure that when she did get an audience with the king, that she looked her best and that she was well prepared. But it also says in verse 15 that she found favor in the eyes of all who saw her. Again, what did she do in order for that to occur? That wasn't up to her. Again, it's God's hand in the story. I mean, she walked in the room and everybody is like, wow. I mean, it wasn't just that she was beautiful, even though she did have that attribute, as it said before. Did you think the other 126 were, not? There was something about Esther that got the attention of everybody. And that something is the same thing that we have. It's the Lord's hand on our life. The third time in verse 17, and this is the big one, it says that she found favor with the king and he made her queen. So the whole orchestration of all of this is to get Esther in that place to be the queen for King Xerxes, basically. So she becomes queen, but there's one special thing that doesn't happen, and this is wisdom too. And it's she hides her identity. She doesn't tell anybody that she's Jewish. And Mordecai, again, our cousin in the story, the wise kind of mentor for her, tells her, look, don't publish to everybody that you're a Jew. He doesn't say to lie. He doesn't say to do anything against it. He just says, just don't tell people. It becomes apparent later, but only when it's time. Only in God's timing does it become obvious who she is. So in verse 10, it says the same. It says, Esther did not make known to her people or her kindred, for Mordecai had instructed her that she should not make them known. And again in verse 20, Esther had not made known to her kindred or her people, make known her kindred or her people, even as Mordecai had commanded her. Listen, and the kids are not paying any attention, but it says here, for Esther did what Mordecai told her, as she had done when under his care. So what this is saying, not just for you, but for all of us, is that those of us, when we're under the care of someone else as a believer, and that person is a spiritual person, a believer, we should pay attention to their advice. Don't pay attention to everybody's advice necessarily. The world gives bad advice. But Mordecai was giving Esther advice all along, and she learned to follow it. So that when the time came that something really important was told to her, she obeyed it. She could have easily said, well, yeah, I'm Jewish, to somebody and all the people that she was dealing with. But he had warned her not to, and she obeyed that. Had she said it, do we know what would have happened? No. But we know that she didn't, and we know it was a wise thing because it's recorded, and we know that she did that because she was listening to everybody else. So I bring up something, and he leaves to the back. I start preaching to him. He's gone. He doesn't even realize I'm talking about him. That's how much they're paying attention. So not to lose everybody else, let's move on to the last thing. There's 3 verses left in the book, in the chapter. And it's a forgotten event. It's something that doesn't seem to mean anything. There's 3 verses thrown in at the end there. It doesn't seem to mean anything. Until later, it's going to seem to mean something. So Mordecai is just at the king's gate. He's just sitting there doing what he does on a normal afternoon, maybe sunning, maybe it's a nice day. And he hears of a plot against the king from 2 of the servants or 2 of the people that are in his court. And it doesn't really say much about what the plot is, but they planned to lay their hands on him. Probably not good for the king if they laid their hands on him, right? So Mordecai goes to Esther and says, look, I heard this. Bring this up to the king, next time you're with him, and just let him know that I heard this, and let him know that I was the one that heard it. So she does. The king, of course, gets it investigated, finds out that it's true. There's some plot against him. And those 2 meet an untimely end, let's say. It's probably not a good one. But out of this, what happened? What does Mordecai get out of this? What does Esther get out of this? Nothing, right? It's recorded in the, what is it called? In the Chronicles of the King. So it's recorded in the Chronicles, but no reward, no recognition, no big thing to say, look what Mordecai did or look what Esther did to save me. Just records it and moves on. Maybe it was a daily occurrence in their kingdom. I don't think so. But anyway, it appears to be insignificant. But keep a bookmark in that for next week and the week after, because it's going to become to be a significant event. So kind of to summarize, we're almost done. The main points of chapters 1 and 2. God's silence does not equal God's absence. Just because you don't hear him doesn't mean he's not working. That's the Waymaker song, right? Even when we don't see it or hear it, he's still working. The earthly power is fragile and temporary. This was the biggest, greatest kingdom in the world. It was 1,500 years ago. Nobody knows about it anymore. No, 2,500. My math is, he's the math guy, I'm not. At the time, the greatest power in the world. It's just footnotes in history and, what he did with, in the Bible related to it. There's nothing left of Xerxes anymore, or the whole kingdom. He works through ordinary events. Again, it's not always this whole big prophecy and miracles thing. And the last one, he puts people in position before they understand why. And I think that's an important point for us as we leave from today. Esther and Mordecai, none of the people in this story at this point know what's coming. They don't know that there's going to be a big deal. Mordecai doesn't know the part he's going to play, and neither does Esther. And neither does the king, obviously. He's probably clueless for most of it. But they're put in position beforehand in ways that they can't even understand. And the things that happened to get them into that position, they don't even recognize as being from God, but it is him. So his hidden hand is a big thing that we're going to talk about through the story. Eventually things come out, but before they do, the groundwork's already there. So we've now been introduced to 3 of the 4 major players in our story, the king and Esther and Mordecai. And there's one to come next week, just a spoiler alert. He's a bad dude. His name is Haman. Read about him in chapters 3 through 5 for next week. So that's it for this.
Can I add one more
You
to
may.
your list?
Yes.
God also works in his own time, because there's 4 years
Mhm.
between where we first meet
Yep.
the king and when Esther becomes the queen.
That's right.
You know, and gets to be with him.
Yep.
So that's 4 years.
Right.
So this isn't happening, you know.
And that's one of the reasons why we don't see it.
Yeah.
Because we just don't sit back and reflect, 5 years ago, where was I? And what's happened between all of that time to get me to where I am today? What has God done? I mean, we do that some here, and we do share those things. But it's often well after the fact, before the light bulb goes on and says, wow, back during COVID, God did this. And it really changed the trajectory of where I'm at now, that I would have never, if that didn't happen, and it happens all the time. We don't think that way. But God works in ways we can't see. But that old Don Moen song, he works in ways we cannot see, he will make a way for me. Yeah, I don't know where that came from. That's a good old song. But he does that, and when we don't recognize it. So that was the story for this week, kind of laid the groundwork for next. Read chapters 3 through 5 for next week. A major situation's about to erupt. And some of the groundwork that's been laid, that we've just talked about in the first 2 chapters, is going to become more and more important. Not only is it going to affect the main characters in this story, it's going to affect the entire nation. And if Mordecai and Esther aren't there, it doesn't end well for the whole nation. And that's God's obviously main purpose. And they're part of that purpose. So be ready for that. But even at this, think about it as you're reading 3, 4, and 5. Think about the gravity of the situation they're in, and think about the decisions that they have to make. It's not easy what they're about to deal with. All right, let's pray. Well, Father, thank you for the first week of our series here. We pray that you would lead us through this time in all 3 weeks to not just learn a Bible story, not just see how you delivered your people through this story, but also to see how it applies to us in our life, what you've delivered us from, what you have brought us through in our lives that have made us who we are, who you have us intertwined with, that we can be the salt and the light in their lives. All of that is your hidden hand. All of that is us just learning to walk with you and each other and see the things that you're doing in our lives many times after the fact. So Lord, I pray for the next lesson that you'll speak to us through chapters 3, 4, and 5 for next week, and that you'll use this long after this series is over to help us think differently about how you work in our lives. We love you, Lord. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.